Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining. Hopefully you will find it informative and plan your company's actions when it comes to PPE and lifting. Today's webinar, as we said, is on general workshop PPE. I just want to give you a little bit about myself. My name is Steve Edwards. I'm the Category Manager at Motion for Safety, Materials Handling and Storage. I've been the Category Manager at Motion for the last 2.5 years, but prior to that I've worked in the manufacturing side of the safety industry for about 25 years. I've been selling and training on all aspects of PPE, including footwear and height safety and the broader range of PPE. I believe this has given me a broad understanding of products and the application use that we're going to cover today. Before we get started, let's have a look at, we've got a panel up the top there that you can open for Q&A. Please put in your questions during the webinar. Happy to look at all the questions at the end and hopefully give you some good answers that will help your company select a great PPE program. So before we start, I just want to have a look at some stats that we should think about before we go through this program and think about how it affects us as workers, as employers, as employees going forward. So some likely stats are in 2022, there are 4.53 million work-related medically treated injuries in the Australian workplace. And a medically treated injury can be a cut, can be a fracture or a break, can also be stress-related. And not all injuries result in LTIs, and workers can resume straight away. I guess of those 4.53 million, in 2023, 191 workers went to work that day and didn't come home, which, whilst the figure doesn't seem that large, it's alarming that someone can go to work and not come home. Of the breakup of that, 93% of those fatalities were males. And other than vehicle deaths, 13% were by moving objects, 9% by falling objects, 9% from falls at height, which is alarming, 6% are being trapped between objects. So you can see there's a lot that can harm us when we do go to work that we have to be really, really mindful of. As I said, there's 64% of these injuries happened in 3 product groups or 3 industry groups. So transport and warehousing, and that's where vehicle deaths would come in. Construction, which again is a really, it's an industry in Australia that is quite common, and obviously agriculture and forestry. So people on the land are losing their lives as well, just through their simple day-to-day operation. The average LTI, so lost time injury in Australia for a worker, is 24.8 hours, so just over 3 days. This costs the company, costs Australia a lot of money in training other employees, covering other employees to do the job that that person has been tasked to do. So PPE becomes a really important part of the process of companies' thoughts going forward. So today we're going to talk about the correct selection and the use of PPE and what products are available for a general workshop environment. Why PPE? Personal protective equipment. Good question. As it says there, PPE should be provided and worn when hazards from harmful substances or harmful processes cannot otherwise be prevented or suitably controlled. We'll talk about that a little bit more into the webinar. Complete protection is essential because of the nature of the hazard. You know, days gone by, we were quite happy to go and do some welding in our short sleeves and shorts, not really thinking about the consequences of it. And another issue today around PPE is that legislation requires the use and the provision by employers to provide PPE and safe working environments to all employees. So let's start with what we know, the recognition of hazards. Many hazards in the workplace must first be recognised or anticipated to be controlled. Such recognition generally requires detailed knowledge of the following: the work process. So how is the work done? If it's a welding job, what rods do we use? What wire do we use? What are the materials present, the physical form and the properties? What gases, vapours do they put off if it's in welding? Control measures currently in place. Do we have anything to stop the employee from getting hurt? And the degree of exposure. How often, how long, and how much are they exposed to the job that they're doing? So in control of hazards, we look at there are different levels of controlling something. The most effective way is the elimination of a hazard. Physically remove the hazard from the job that we're doing. Can we substitute it? Is there an engineering process that we can do to make sure we don't get exposed? Check the way people work, and then finally, the use of PPE. So let's delve into that a little bit more. The controls of hazards. Where a problem has been identified and an action is required, hopefully below will help you estimating what PPE or elimination you can use. So we talked about elimination. We have substitution. A process may be substituted or modified by the use of less hazardous materials or process equipment. For example, the risk of inhaling toxic dust might be reduced by modifying dust-producing processes using such things as water and coolants. These would be added to the source of the dust. Isolation. Isolating a process from the immediate workplace may be carried out by locating a physical barrier between the hazard or the operator. So could we put in a process whereby the operator has a screen that they can still use the machine or whatever they're doing that doesn't require some PPE? Other engineering controls include ventilation. Where airflow is a problem, we may be able to use a machine that will remove any of that contaminant from the air. An example of that would be if we're going into a confined space. Administrative control. The operator may be located further away from the process, or can we divide the amount of operators so that each operator is exposed for just a shorter period? So from there, we need to look at steps. If we decide that PPE is the outcome, we actually need to look at steps that should be an integral part of the hazard control. This should be established by management or an individual designated to head up the program. This person should have an understanding of the workplace hazards and should also be trained in those areas. So a standard procedure can be developed based on the following. What's the basis for the selection of PPE? Why do we need PPE? Can we use another method? Medical screening. Medical screening is an important one. We need to set a baseline. We need to set a baseline so that if any claim is forthcoming, we know where the operator started and where they've ended. An example of this would be in hearing. If they're working in a noisy environment, what was their hearing level prior to putting in a claim for hearing? Training program. We need to make sure that the person using the equipment is very well trained and has sufficient training in that use of the PPE. It's no point just giving them a respirator, for example, and expecting that they'll understand if they've never been trained on it. Assigning PPE or clothing to employees for exclusive use. It does say where practicable, but really, in this day and age, every person should have their own personal PPE. We talk about the proper fitting of PPE. This may involve respiratory, where a person has stubble or a beard. Will a disposable respirator actually be fit for purpose? Will that do the job? Do they need to go to a full face respirator? As with most things in industry, regular maintenance of the equipment is essential. There's no point treating your PPE equipment poorly and expecting it still to work at a premium. The storage also is important, and this can be highlighted again in respiratory. You walk around many workshops and you see a mask, a disposable mask or a reusable mask just left on the top of the toolbox. Most people don't understand that this mask is continually working and picking up whatever is in the atmosphere. So the next time you go to use that mask, there's incredibly bad breathing resistance. We should also always inspect our PPE before we use it. And that would be, again, if we're using, say, harnesses in a height safety situation, making sure there's no nicks or cuts in the harness, anything that can cause a breakage during use. Okay, so once we've decided to select our PPE for the job, a PPE program needs to be established. So what's the nature of the hazard? What do I need to protect? Have I seen any material data sheets on the products that we're operating on? What do they recommend you use? And the circumstances. How long will I be exposed to the hazard? Am I just there for 15 minutes? Am I there for 30 minutes? Or is this a whole day job? We need to have a look at that. Restrictions. What in the area that I'm working at may cause me not to wear my PPE or may cause my PPE not to work properly? Acceptance level of the hazard is, do we use PPE or can we otherwise engineer it out? Which reverts back to the slides earlier. For example, if it's a confined space, do we have sufficient ventilation? Do we need to make sure a worker's put in there in a harness and an SCBA? They're all what we need to establish. And finally, performance requirement. Will the chosen PPE give me all the protection I require? If I'm doing a welding job, do I have hearing protectors? Do I have eyewear? Do I have respiratory? If I'm working under items, have I got a hard hat? Those sort of items or those sort of questions need to be asked prior to doing the job. So when we're looking at the selection, what's the design of the product? Does the design meet the Australian relevant standards specifications? Remembering that PPE in the Australian workplace is highly standardised. We need to conform and comply with all relevant Australian standards. User acceptance. I guess the calculated degree of protection will not be achieved unless the equipment or the clothing is always worn when the person is at risk. Therefore, items selected must be compatible with the nature of the work, but also comfort is a vital factor. People will not wear equipment if it is not comfortable. And training and education. The importance of training and education, as we said earlier, the recognition of the PPE, the correct instruction and use of the PPE, the limitation of that PPE. The PPE won't do all the jobs that you require, and then the maintenance of the chosen PPE. So once we've established our PPE program, I just wanted to have a look at the most common types of PPE in a workshop environment that most people will come across, and worth just knowing a little bit about what is available. So today we'll look at hand protection, hearing protection, some respiratory and some eye protection, and hopefully we can give you some solutions to what you're using now. So we start with gloves. The selection of the right type of glove is essential in protecting user from hazards that they may encounter during their work. These include chemicals, biological hazards, heat, extreme cold, abrasive surfaces, and mechanical hazards. Gloves can protect against chemical exposure infections, burns, cuts, and damage to the skin. The following products are a guide in selecting the right type of glove for the different types of work hazards encountered in the workplace. So we start with the leather or riggers gloves. It's a traditional glove that has been used for many years in materials handling and general workshop yard work. It's used to guard against injuries from sparks, scraping against rough surfaces, or from cuts from sharp objects like metal. And over the years, these products have morphed into more synthetic coated products. Synthetic coated products are very good for the materials handling and maintenance operations. They're great in construction and automotive. And generally, the synthetic coated gloves offer an exceptional slip resistance, which is really important, again, obviously, when you're handling greases and oils. The synthetic glove has then morphed into cut-resistant gloves. A cut-resistant glove designed to cater for the sharp end of the market, ideal for metal, glass, or using sharp knives. Today, most cut-resistant gloves are iPhone or user-friendly. You don't need to take your gloves off to use RFID or your phone or any of the computer panels. Obviously, the more you keep your gloves on, the less you're going to be exposed to hazards. We then look at nitrile disposable gloves. A variety of applications include manufacturing, food processing, engineering, general handling of any greasy and dirty parts. So if you're packing a bearing, you should be wearing some disposable gloves. If you're handling greasy, oily parts, again, I would recommend that you use disposable gloves. And they can be used in a variety of applications in our food processing areas. And finally, we have the good old welding glove. Obviously used in high heat situations, welding, sparks, steel fabrication or foundry work. They certainly give the operator an excellent level of protection. Okay, so we move on now to hearing. Hearing protectors are required to prevent noise-induced hearing loss. And as I spoke about earlier in the webinar, most companies now go to a level where they know the starting point of people's hearing to the end point of people's hearing. So hearing protection devices reduce the noise energy reaching and causing damage to the inner ear. Earmuffs and earplugs are the most common types of PPE. Employers should make hearing protectors available to all employees exposed to an 8-hour weighted average time of 85 decibels or greater. And this would be just around a general platform of noise in a workshop. Training on all parts of hearing is essential, as you'll often see people walking around with earplugs just sticking out of their ear and not really doing a good job. So we need to train our people on how to best insert an earplug into the ear. So what type of hearing we've got? As we said before, we've got earplugs, both disposable and reusable, generally made from expandable slow recovery foam or silicone. Helps provide a great combination of comfort and hearing protection for users. Can be used in a variety of applications, can also be used in conjunction with earmuffs. Earmuffs today, they provide a barrier to the protection of noise. Earmuffs come in a variety of forms: over the head style, behind the neck, cap mounted, electronic and communication. Communication muffs have become necessary in the workplace due to the high noise levels, and it allows the user to maintain the hearing protection whilst communicating with other workers without having to take their hearing protectors off. No need to keep taking on and off your earmuffs. talk about respiratory, and respiratory these days is one of the biggest and most contentious issues in the marketplace. We'll see through legislation that things like silica dust have been outlawed. But prior to that, what did we have? So a respirator is generally worn on the face, covers the nose and the mouth, and is used to reduce the wearer's risk of inhaling hazardous airborne particles. This may include dust particles and infectious agents, gases or vapours. Respirators protect the user in two basic ways. The first is by the removal of contaminants from the air. Respirators of this type include particulate respirators, which filter out airborne particles, and air purifying respirators with cartridges and canisters, which filter out chemicals and gases. Other respirators protect by supplying clean air supply from another source. Respirators that fall into this category include airline respirators, which use compressed airs from a remote source, and self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, which include their own air supply. And I've put down there some disposable masks. So you can see from there, we can have cup shape, flat fold, or valved or non-valved masks. These are all generally P1 or P2 level of protection, with P2 being the most common today. The valve is used to remove hot or misty air from the breather, so your mask is not filling up with humidity, and it gives the user a little bit more comfort. As I mentioned earlier, when wearing respiratory, it's advised to be clean shaven, as people with beards on the disposable side will have breakthrough, and whatever gas or vapour, even the particles, will leak through because there's no firm seal between the face and the mask. Then we have reusable half and full face respirators. Again, these products protect against gases, particles, vapours, and a combination of the two. The respirators have integrated or replaceable filters and parts, and the full face variety offers integrated eye and face protection. And finally, we've gone over to the powered air and supplied air systems. These offer protection against all the chemicals, dust, mists, fumes, gases, and vapours, and are excellent for areas with low ventilation, confined space, and use for longer wear. And finally, on this part, we look at eye protection. Nearly all cases of eye damage that occur in Australia are preventable. Damage to the eye can be avoided by suitable design and engineering controls, following well-established safe working procedures, and where necessary, wearing suitable eye protection. There are many occupations where eyes are at risk. Workers at risk include those with mechanical equipment, chemicals, and sources of radiation, mainly ultraviolet radiation from welding and infrared radiation from furnaces. Most glasses are low to medium impact. They come in a variety of lens colours, from clear, smoke, blue, polarised, and to this day have become a fashion trend in the workplace. Now, it says their style is a critical factor when it comes to user acceptance of eyewear. Most safety eyewear is made from polycarbonate lenses, and as mentioned, offer a medium impact rating. We move on to safety goggles. The safety goggles and shields provide more protection than safety glasses, as they form a seal around the eyes, protecting from all angles. They are used where it is possible for splash or grinding sparks, and these also come in a variety of styles, shades, and face shields. And as you can see in the middle of that photography there, we can have a full face shield and goggles combined. So we've covered a little bit about our PPE program and how do we start a PPE program in the workplace. We also want to look at how do we do our lifting safely? Excuse me. So again, as with PPE, it's important to recognise and control the hazards that we're going against. So we assess an area surrounding where the lift will take place. Have we got trip or slip hazards? Do we have adequate lighting? Is there a pedestrian exclusion area? Are there heavy equipment in the area? We need to look at our lifting points on the item that's going to be lifted. Are they connected properly? Are they damaged? If no lifting points identified, can we ensure appropriate alternate methods such as choking slings, choking chains, or suitable clamps? Remember to also check your anchor above. What point are we using? For condition and capacity, if you're lifting with hoisting equipment, can I use push trolleys or beam clamps, which is in the images to the right? Is the lifting area safely secured to prevent pedestrians walking under or close by the lifted item? Again, people like courier drivers, contractors, employees and visitors. How do we determine the load capacity for the equipment to be lifted? On most items, we can identify data plates, tags, or marking indicator loads. If an assembly, use component weights to give an indicative weight. Use either load, cell, or scales to determine the weight, ensuring that the equipment used to determine weight is in excess of the indicative weight. An example of that be a transformer weighs 2 tonne, so you can use a spreader bar, chain slings and components that will have a safe working load of 2 tonne. But with all the extra bits, the crane, the chain block, the hoist or other lifting devices must be rated more than 2 tonne to encompass the equipment as well as the item being lifted. So how do we select the correct lifting equipment rated to be the equipment to be lifted? Well, we need to choose between synthetic, chain or wire equipment to lift the load. Always ensure that your equipment is rated higher, as we previously said, than the load. Ensure equipment and accessories are suitable for the lift. When using equipment, ensure personnel is trained in the correct use of the equipment. For example, loads with sharp edges are better served with chain slings. Uneven loads where lifting points are at a different level are best suited to chain slings with shortening grab hooks, so that each leg of a sling can be individually adjusted to maintain a level lift. Fragile and easily marked items should be lifted by soft slings. Pipes and bundles of cylinders are lifted by round slings that can be choked to maintain a better grip on the load. Items that need to be lifted using spreader bars benefit from flat slings with eyes or chain slings. Both shackles are convenient as the way are two-piece devices and are easy to use and secure. But the three-piece safety shackles are better for securing a vibrating load or ease in use of larger capacities. For offshore use, non-standard dimensions or task-specific shackles, green pin shackles are the product to go for. Selection of the correct equipment rated to the equipment to be lifted. So we ensure lifting equipment is attached correctly, no twists in the synthetic or the chain. The shackles are well secured, split pins in safety shackle bolts, obstructed safety catches on hooks, and hooks are closed. Vibration makes things come loose. If the lift is in a shaky or environment that vibrates, normal shackles and clamps may come loose. Use safety shackles or locking clamps. If in doubt, check equipment for damage, function and suitability. If in doubt, replace or upgrade. As a matter of course, all lifting equipment should be inspected prior to use to ensure it's in a safe working condition, and if not, make sure it's replaced. Any twists, chokes or kinks have a negative effect of the capacity and the durability of the equipment we use. There will be times where self-locking hooks and safety catch hooks are not closed, clamps will not engage properly, or shackles will not be fully tightened. Ensure that all points are checked prior to the lift and avoid dropping the load. So just a summary of what we've covered today. So we've looked at steps in a PPE program. We looked at the selection of PPE to suit that program. We looked at some of the protective gear that's available in workshops. We've talked about how to lift products safely and the use of their products. We looked at recognition of hazards and the controls in both PPE and lifting. We determined the lifting load capacity of the equipment to be used. And we looked at the selection of the correct lifting equipment rated to the equipment to be lifted. You can find out more about this information. We have a PPE and site safety brochure on the Motion Knowledge Hub, and certainly in the Motion industry magazines, which cover off many articles, testimonials, and special news. Motion is powered by several high-rating suppliers or manufacturers into the safety and lifting industry. Again, our premier partners of 3M, Titan Lifting Technologies, Bolle Eyewear, Uvex Eyewear and Respiratory, the glove company, Nitrile Disposable Gloves, and PIP Global for your pro-choice products. We also have our 6 monthly Australian workbench catalogues, where many of these products are featured. There are also articles on the use of some of the products. I advise, if you haven't seen this, ask your rep to organise a copy of the workbench catalogues for your company. Okay, so we can move into the question and answer section of the webinar. Not sure if anyone has got any questions. We have Tom Schmidt online from Titan Lifting if you have any lifting questions. But I certainly also am able to answer any questions on the PPE use and selection. Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any questions as yet, but you can contact me at motion.com.au. I thank you for your time today, and hopefully you've got a little bit out of this webinar. Please speak to your local Motion rep. If you need any more information or you would like to see a PPE specialist or their manufacturing company, please reach out. But again, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.